Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
On last week's show, I told you about my first two sightings I had down around Cumberland Dams, Gordon, and Coon Lakes. This week, I will tell you about my other two encounters and my recent one that happened this Memorial Day with two of my friends. So I'll start out with the third encounter. I was buck hunting on first day of buck season. This was out near Ogletown, PA, off of Route 56. There is a road that goes off to the left and it goes out into Blue Knob Mountain. And there's a crossroads. And then this crossroads, there's three counties that meet at that crossroads. It's Bedford, Somerset, and Cambria County all come together in that one area. And I was back there hunting probably about 300 yards from my car from the road. It's like a dirt road back there. And I walked in before daylight and there's no snow or anything on the ground. And you walk back, it's about a 4-foot wide tram road that goes up back. It's actually turns into the Lost Turkey Trail, which goes throughout Ogletown, and it goes for a long way. So I went back, and it loops around toward the right, and I found a nice tree to sit. There was a log against the tree, and I wanted to sit there for buck season, but for the first day. So I got there before daybreak in the dark, and I sat down there, and I probably sat down until about 10:30 or 11 o'clock that day. And I just happened to be facing like away from the road, and I spotted some movement. And so I had a 30-06 pump rifle with a scope. And I also had binoculars. Well, first, I picked my gun up and looked through the scope, and at first I thought it was a person. I assumed it was a game warden because it was like all like a medium brown color. It wasn't the same color as the other ones I've seen. This one was a little bit different than the other ones in appearance. But at first I thought it was a game warden walking through the woods in all brown. I thought, what kind of idiot would be walking through with medium brown clothing on the first day of buck season? So since it was a person, I put my gun down right away. I got my binoculars and I looked through my binoculars and I got a real close view. They're like, the binoculars I have are like 8 power. They're a small set. They're not real great, but you can get it pretty clear on there. And I looked through them, and this thing was walking down over a small hill directly towards me. And it was probably about 200 yards out. from me. And as it was walking down, I looked through the binoculars and I realized that was not a game warden. That was all fur. That wasn't clothing. And it was like it was almost, it was a little darker than a deer color. It was like a medium brown color, which the other ones were usually like a blackish gray, like slightly darker than a beech tree in this area, which is like a dark grayish, brownish color, But I noticed that it had real fat thigh muscles, like big around, and real long thighs, like a giant. If you ever see one of those giant wrestlers, they have like a small torso, and it had real long thigh area, and its legs are really tall, and its arms were very long too. They were like down to its knees. And then the face of it looked like it had a really big brow on where its eyebrows would be. It was like out over everything. And then I did see like a flat nose on it. And it had, like most of the other ones I've seen, they have an oval around their both eyes, one big oval that goes around their eyes. And in that area, there's either no fur or like real light fur. And their skin is like a grayish color. And then it had real broad shoulders and big pectoral muscles also. That's what I seen through the binoculars. And this sighting was kind of uneventful, where it walked down over the hill. I seen it walk down the hill to that trip, the Lost Turkey Trail back here, because I was like 200 yards away from that trail. And it walked towards my right, and it just walked out that trail till it was out of sight. I couldn't see it any longer. And I continued to hunt there all day, but I didn't see it after that. And one other time in that same time frame afterwards, there's a gas line out there that goes, it's like probably about a 20-foot wide clearing where the gas line goes through. And one time there was pretty deep snow, like 2 foot snow out there. And I seen some massive tracks out there, but it looked like it was dragging something in between its feet or something behind it or something. It looked like just a little wide, about 2-inch wide continuous line between the footprints. And the footprints were probably like 8 or 10 feet apart from each other. So this was, whatever it was massive. And that's what I seen in that area. That was my third encounter. And I've also heard a lot of knocking in that area, but across the road from where I was. I've heard a lot of different knocking sounds and whistles, and I heard a few whoops back there. But that was before I ever seen that one back here. So I didn't know they were actually back there too. That was my third encounter. And then my fourth encounter, I think it was about 2020. I was at Beaver Dam Run Reservoir near Beaverdale, Pennsylvania, in Cambria County. And I took my kayak out on the lake there. And the lake is pretty big right in the main body of it where you launch the boat. And if you go straight across there, the breast is over there. It's like 45 feet deep, and it's probably 500. Well, it's about a mile from the dock to the breast. That's how wide the lake is. On the right side of that lake, from the right side of the breast, there's a very long cove that extends back into the woods. It's real remote back here. There's no roads or anything. And I've done a lot of night fishing in that area. And there's like 3 different sets of coyote packs back here. We've heard them like all 3 packs like answering each other from different sides of the lake there. So I know there's not a whole lot of people that go back in there because it's like very swampy and it's real thick back here. And what happened was I took my kayak up there and I paddled clean to the back end because there's a little trout stream that runs into the lake. And a lot of times I catch nice brook trout back here. There's really nice bass in there and stuff. So I decided to go way back in there since my boat, I didn't have good batteries and I didn't make it back there for a long time. So I ended up going back there and I fished my way around the back, like the breast end of it. And I fished my way back into that cove. And there's like 2 little inlets back there. And I was fishing the second inlet. And right there, it gets very shallow. There's like a lot of continuous rocks right in there. And some of them come up like it's only a foot deep in there. So you got to watch where you're at or you could get stuck in there. So what happened was I went into this one cove. It's like the last cove on the left. And I was fishing and then I came out of that cove and I was going to go back to the furthest part back. And when I got back out towards the open water more, I looked over at the bank and I seen what looked like it looked like the other ones that I seen. It's a Bigfoot. It looks like a person standing there. It was at the edge of the lake. There's no trees very close to the lake. And back there, it's all like bushes. And those bushes are probably 12 foot tall or so. I don't know. But this thing was standing outside in the reeds right at the edge of the lake. And it was standing there with its arms to its side, nearly to its knees. It had very long arms and very long legs again. And no neck. They don't have their head is set right on their shoulders. It seems there's no neck on them, the ones I've seen. And it stood there and watched me fish. And I'm like looking at him like, is this for real? I'm seeing another one. I couldn't hardly believe it myself. And I'm like, well, it's right there standing watching me. That day it was kind of windy and I was fighting the wind a little bit, trying to not to hit them rocks and get stuck in there. And I started paddling against the wind out into the middle of that cove because I wanted to get closer to see if that was one. And I started paddling and I looked down for a second. I looked up and it got out of there. It was not there anymore. And there's no trees in that area that I could mistake it for something else. And that was definitely a Sasquatch. From what I've seen, the other ones I've seen, it looked identical. It had the oval around its eyes, and the rest is all hair on it, like long, stringy hair. And that's not the only thing I saw on that lake. Just recently, this past Memorial Day weekend, on Sunday and Monday. Sunday, I took my boat out, and I took my 2 friends, Robert and Logan, out on the lake with me, and we were fishing for bass and whatever we could catch. And we were about halfway across to the breast on the right side there. And we went back into this little cove. We were pretty close to the bank in this cove, fishing like for bluegills and stuff. And all of a sudden we started hearing what sounded like an owl calling, but it didn't sound like a real owl. It sounded like someone trying to imitate an owl. And that happened like 3 times in a row. It stopped and then it did it again for like, it would do this for like 2 or 3 minutes and then stop. And it did that 3 times. And then after it did it the 3rd time, then we started hearing these, it was just like a monkey. It sounded very monkey-like. And it was multiple whooping. Like they just started like a monkey does. It sounded just like an ape doing whooping like over and over. And it was more than one. There was like multiple ones doing it back here. And it did that for a good while, like at least 2 minutes or something. And then it stopped and I was trying to look way up in there to see if any movement or anything. And I'm pretty sure I spotted one back there, but I'm not 100% positive. But I told Robbie and Logan, I said, look right up through that clearing. Is that one or not? We were all looking and it was whatever it was moving around and it was dark, the same color as one of them. So I'm assuming that was them up in there. And then the next day, Robbie couldn't go. So I took Logan, just me and Logan went up there and, we fished till a little bit after dark. The bass started really hitting right after dark. So we were on our way back in towards the dock. And when we got like right out from the dock, we were like right in the middle of the lake, not quite in front of the dock yet. And Logan hollers at me, Jeff, look across the thing. Cause I was facing the dock and he was facing away from the dock. Cause the front of the boat was towards the dock and he was facing back. And he spotted what he described as 2 large eyes glowing red. But once I looked over, I didn't see them. So I didn't get to see the red glowing eyes, but he seen them good and it glowed red for a few seconds before he hollered at me. When he hollered, that's when I looked over, they weren't there. So I don't know what happened. And then we heard running that was going around towards the other side, towards where the dock is. So we were pretty nervous there and we hurried up and I ran up to the car. I had my 44 Magnum pistol. So I took my pistol with me and went up and got the car and came down and we hurried up and got that boat out of there and we got out of there that evening. And then on the way home, I said, well, about how tall was it? And we were on our way back towards Beaverdale and one of the houses there had a street light on the corner of the garage towards the road. And he said, well, it was about that as high as that light. And that light was at least 8 foot off the ground. So whatever that was very tall. And he seen it clearly. It was peeking out from a tree back here. There was a little bit of moonlight that night, but it was like over the trees. So it was kind of dark out on the lake, but you could see a little bit of what was in the woods there. But unfortunately, I didn't see the red eyes, but he was sincere. That same day, also, while we were working our way around that half of the lake with the boat, there was like rocks being thrown at us the whole way around. And we heard a lot of whistling and a lot of heavy rustling in the leaves and stuff. It felt like they were following us around the lake. And I don't know if that's for sure or not, but we definitely heard something moving around in there. And we did hear rocks hitting the water and hitting the stumps in front of us when we were fishing. So there was something throwing rocks or something in there. That was before we got to the dock and everything. That was during the daytime. And I wanted to go over and give a little bit of description of some of the ones I seen. On the first encounter, I actually seen two separate ones. The first one, it was sitting on the ground. Like I said, it was like an ape, and it had its back towards me. When it was facing away from me, it kind of looked like a long chimp to me. Same thing, it didn't have a neck. Its head was right on its shoulders. And I could see its ears, and I could see when it turned its head to the left to look at me, I seen its face, and this one did not have hair on its entire face. It was like almost like a Caucasian light colored grayish skin on its face. But it looked like, I would describe it by looking like a chimpanzee's face, like an old one, but it was longer face than that. That's what that one looked like. But then it took off up over the hill, and it went straight up the mountain. And then I chased it up the mountain, got through the thicket, and another one come from the left on a logging road. It was an old logging road from years ago. And I was only probably 30 yards away from that one. So I seen it clearly, very clearly. And it was sunny, bright day out. So I seen the muscles moving on it. I know it was a creature of some sort. It was definitely a live being, whatever you call them. And it had the oval around its face, but its facial hair was very thin on it. And it had, I know its mouth area stuck out, kind of like a gorilla does. And then it's where a human would have a nose, it was flat there. And it was like sunken back into its face slightly. That it had the pretty large brow on it. And I recently seen where they had a severed head of a actual Bigfoot that I think it was in Georgia or Tennessee or something. I guess they hit it. They ran it over with a car on a back road or something. And then they went back and they cut the head off of it for some reason. And they had a taxidermist stuff it. But they showed a picture of it, and it was missing its upper lip, but that face looked very much like the second one I seen there. It had like a smaller nose on it. It almost looked like it didn't have a nose. It was like sunken back in there, but there's a little bump there. And I seen the teeth. The teeth looked like they were off white colored, and when it curled its lip up, I seen one fang sticking down, kind of like a gorilla. And then the rest of it was all long, stringy hair. Like it was almost black, but grayish. Like I said, a little bit darker than a beech tree. And when it stepped up on the rocks, I seen its feet. They were long and flat looking. They were very long. Like I'd estimate 15 inches, but I don't know. I think it was like a younger one from its actions on the last rock where it balanced itself. I'm thinking that was like a teenage one or something, because just the way it was acting. But that's my opinion on it. But I mean, I could have been wrong, but that's what I thought it looked like. And then, like I said, the one out on my third encounter, that was like more of a medium brown color. It was kind of reddish, but not reddish, like a deer, like a little bit darker than what a deer would be. That was how I would describe it. But that one, it actually had giant characteristics. Like if you look at a giant person, They have a big brow and their legs are like, it was enormous, whatever it was. It was massive. I would estimate maybe between 8 and 10 feet. It was massive. It looked like a giant person walking through the woods with very long legs. And then the one out in Beaverdale, it just looked kind of like the second one on my first encounter. It was all like a grayish black color. And it was standing there like a person straight up. So there's no doubt in my mind there's a lot of them in this area. I've had other signs too down at Cumberland Dam where I walked up in fact, that was in 21, in about February of 21. I was squirrel hunting in right above Gordon and Coon Lakes down by Cumberland, Maryland. And I was sitting there for several hours and I started hearing what sounded like a woman and a deep man's voice talking, but they weren't talking in English or any language that I know. It sounded like mumbling and gibberish to me. And it sounded like they were putting on a conversation with each other. They were down over a big ravine from me. But I could not see them, but I could hear them right down over the hill. And I heard them for several minutes, and then I didn't hear them anymore, so I thought, I'm going to get out of here. So I walked back up to the logging road that goes down to my car where I park. And as I was walking to my car, I had a bunch of rocks they were about nut size or so. It sounded like they were hitting the bark on the trees next to where I was walking, like 10 yards away from me. As I walked out, they kept hitting the rocks on the trees next to me, and they would bounce off the trees. I didn't get hit by any, but they were very close. And the whole way down, I could hear them. And I couldn't tell which directions they were coming from. So I don't know if that was the same ones that I actually heard, but it just sounded like a man with a deep voice and a woman talking in like a different language. It was like mumbling gibberish type, I couldn't make any words out or anything. And then I went down and I drove all around the lake and there was not one car down there that day. So that there was no cars and no people down there. So I'm assuming that might have been one of them same Sasquatches or one of the family of them, because I know there's more than one down there. Because I actually heard several of them way up in them mountain wolves on my first encounter. I heard them running up through there right after that one walked into there. And they weren't far from me, but I couldn't see because the mountain laurel was so thick in there, you can't even see through there at all. But I heard their feet slapping on the ground. It was like a clay ground up there with like roots sticking out, and you could hear their feet slapping on the ground as they were running up the trail. So there's no doubt in my mind that Western Pennsylvania is a great place to find a Sasquatch if you're looking to see one. The thing is, I was never looking to see any. I wasn't expecting to see them. I was either hunting or fishing. The first encounter, I didn't even know they existed. I never even thought about that. That's why I thought bear at first, because nothing else down there is black, that dark of a color. But right away, I could tell that was not a bear. There's a lot of differences between a bear and a Sasquatch, because a Sasquatch has shoulders and arms and hands like a person. And a bear, if you look at their body, they're made to be on all fours, and they have a long, thick neck, and then their head's on top of their neck. Well, these things did not have a neck. Their head was right on their shoulders. They had big, wide shoulders, massive shoulder muscles, arms. Their pectorals were massive. They had massive thigh muscles, and their thighs were very much longer than an ordinary person would be. Like if they were those 7-foot plus giants that have they have a big thigh like that. But I seen the muscles moving on these beings, and I seen the rocks that they stepped on, and there's no way a person could step on them rocks that were over 50 inches high. The shortest one was like probably 51 inches or right around there, the rock. So you go try and step on something that high with one step and try to just pick yourself up effortlessly. And I bet you it's pretty much impossible for anybody to do that. So, if you want to go find a Sasquatch, Pennsylvania is a good state to try to find one. All you got to do is go deeper in the woods where most people don't go and be quiet. And just like the other animals in the woods, if you're sitting there and a squirrel comes in, and if you don't mess with that squirrel, it will bring the other squirrels out. And I think a lot of them Sasquatches and the bears and the deer are all the same as that, is where, if you don't harm them, they will come out more. So, I believe that's one of the keys to finding these Sasquatches and actually being able to see one. If you're out to hunt them, they can sense that, just like a squirrel can sense it. So that was my 4 encounters, plus a couple that I'm like 99% sure of that was definitely Sasquatches. And that's about all I got to say about them.
My Bigfoot sighting took place in Concord, Michigan in June of 2009. At first, let me explain a little bit about the location. I had just leased a farm in Concord, Michigan on 120 acres. I was really excited to move into this place because I'm an avid hunter, do a lot of hunting, a lot of outdoor things. And to the east of the property, it was bordered by a 100-acre high fence game ranch with a lot of exotic animals. Animals you wouldn't normally see in Michigan, but axis deer, a lot of whitetails, a lot of elk, buffalo, hogs, different things like that where people would pay to hunt. So that was kind of interesting. There's a lot of strange animal sounds coming from that area. But the area that I hunted, I actually would walk out to the road. I was on a corner of two roads, and I would walk down the first road that I lived on a short distance, and then turn up the next road, which was a dirt road. And I had to walk about 200 yards to get up where I could sneak up into the woods to get into my deer stand without scaring anything. And as I walked out the front of my house, there was a woods directly across the road, relatively flat land, little hills here and there, but for the most part pretty flat. Farmland. There was an abandoned barn just to the edge of the woods across the road, and every time I walked by, I always felt like something was watching me when I went by this barn. It was a strange feeling I got. But I would always go past it, walk up the next road, and interestingly enough, on the other side of that road, my neighbor was Ted Nugent. He lived there, and I actually, from my hunting blind, could see across the road into his hunting blind. And a lot of people thought that Ted owned the game ranch next door to me, which he did not, but he did own one about 10 miles south of there. But anyway, like I said, I heard a lot of strange noises, which I usually attributed to the game ranch. But there was a couple times while hunting out there that I heard some screeching noises that, like they say, made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And they seemed really close, even though I couldn't see anything at the time. But My sighting took place in June, which is not during hunting season, but it was the middle of the day, probably between noon and 1 o'clock. And it was a very sunny day. I was driving my Blazer with my daughter, Gabrielle, who was 2 at the time. She was in the back seat, and I was just getting ready to turn into my driveway, which, like I said, was right across from the woods. I got probably the front 2 wheels in the driveway when I saw something and stopped. Just stopped dead. At first, I thought, man, somebody's pranking me. What is this thing in the road? And I've coached basketball for years and played basketball for years, so I know how tall things are, relative. For instance, my son's 6'6", and to some people that seems huge, but the thing I saw on the road was bigger than that. I would estimate it at about 7.5 feet tall. And I was thinking somebody was trying to prank me. I kept looking around to see what, somebody jump out and laugh or whatever, but it just stood in the road looking at me, and I was dead stop. And I noticed it wasn't the typical Bigfoot that you see on these TV shows. It was tall, but it was slender, very thin, and almost frail looking. His arms were extremely long, well past his knees, and his legs seemed a little bit bent maybe. And he kind of shuffled out and shuffled around in place a little bit, like he didn't know where to go or what to do. His facial features were very humanistic, but the skin was darker and covered with hair, but his eyes seemed almost red, like bloodshot looking. And we locked eyes. I mean, we were maybe 10 yards apart. I was in my Blazer, of course, but I wasn't scared of the creature. And I was probably stopped for, I would say, it seemed like a long time, but maybe 3 to 5 minutes at most. And at one point, he raised one arm out toward me, palm up, very big hands, long arms, like I said. And he just seemed like he was either sickly or confused. So, like I said, I wasn't scared at all. I waited to see what he was going to do. He was attempting to cross the road to come onto my property and got about 3/4 of the way across. And like I said, he was shuffling and moving very, very slowly. At that point, he just turned around and shuffled back into the field by the barn and into that little woods section. I kept waiting, to see if he came out, see where he went. I couldn't see from there. So eventually I went back into the house and looked out the window, which was actually even closer to where he stood in the road. I couldn't see any sign of him anywhere where he might have went. He was, like I said, very tall, moved very slowly, almost like he may have been sick or injured or something. I haven't seen any other sightings since then. I have revisited the area a few times. The barn's now gone. There's a big, beautiful house built where the barn used to stand. But my friend is the local police officer out there, and he has had several calls between then and now of sightings of different people saying they've seen a tall, hairy creature in and out of the woods. And at one point, we had a large storm come through a few years ago, and there were trees across all the roads out there. And my friend was patrolling the area, and there's a few guys out cutting the trees up with their chainsaws and pulling them off the road. And he stopped to ask if he could assist. And they said, no, but you might want to check on that tall, hairy guy that's out there by the woods. So there was another lady who lived a few miles from that location who was called in twice about seeing somebody in and out of the swamp by her house. I guess that's pretty much the extent of my sighting. It was brief, but very exciting. I keep hoping to get another sighting, but it hasn't happened. I have talked to a couple people in the area who have had sightings. Not as vivid as mine, not on a bright sunny day like mine was, but one guy that I talked to, which was a few miles from there, walked out of his house to go hunting early one morning and saw something running on 2 legs very fast, and it jumped over some areas that were pretty high. I went out with him and looked at the area where it jumped. We couldn't find any tracks. We did find a lot of matted grass, but whatever it was that jumped that far had to be pretty large. So I guess that's the end of the story.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking A bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Some call it backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Some call it backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Some call it backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, fried chicken, porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.